Nighttime on Still Waters. This is NB 506812, narrowcasting into the night from somewhere on Britain's waterways. (17th of September, Wednesday). Summer has left, and strewn all along the towpath is the detritus of its sojourn. Rusting wires of sorrel and dock. Hogweed spokes, like upturned discarded umbrellas. Hawthorn berries litter the ground like carelessly flung confetti. The wind has now blown out the willowherb candles. A few wisps of seeds hang like cobwebs. Now is the time for autumn's fires. Hips, haws, rowan, Bryony, and firethorn. It's a blustery old night, with a spit of rain in the air, scudding clouds and no moon. It's a highwayman kind of night tonight, wild and reckless, that sets the oaks and alders sighing. With such little light, the water is ink black, wind harrowed, choppy and ruffled. This is the narrowboat Erica, narrowcasting into the darkness of a breezy autumn night, to you, wherever you are. Thank you so much for dropping by. There are rumours of rain in the forecast for tonight, so come inside. The kettle is on, a seat is waiting specially for you. Let's find a little bit of peace and quiet together in a world of noise. And welcome aboard. These are the days you never quite know what to wear. You pick a raincoat to cope with showers only to be too hot, or leave your jumper at home as it's lovely and sunny and warm, only to be blindsided by a blustery wind that has the edge of north in it. One thing that is fairly certain is that whatever you decide to wear in the morning will be totally inappropriate for the afternoon. We appear to be reassuringly back in the territory of classic British weather. This last couple of weeks have been characterized by successive bands of sunshine and showers, and the grass is springing back, and the pastures are once again turning back to being predominantly green. And the canal we're currently on is now fully open again, although there were a couple of section closures due to fallen trees, but I believe all of these have been resolved. And my concerns about the locks being reused and what that may mean locally to the water levels have been rather allayed. There's been a slow but important increase in traffic, and the water levels appear to be holding up really well, which is good. And while it's great to see so much green returning to the fields, it is noticeable that the hedges and bank sides are taking on a definite autumnal hue. There's a wash of browns, oranges, tans, russets, scarlets, yellows, and ochre. Vegetation is beginning to die back. Bramble branches, heavy with blackberries, now beginning to taste a little watery, hang low in profusion, as if begging the casual passer-by to reach up and pluck a freely offered fruit. The fruits of the labour of those wet spring days and the heats of summer. And black Bryony has done really well this year. We normally get a pretty good showing anyway, but this year it's been amazing. Thick braids of scarlet and vermilion berries drape and hang like richly jewelled bracelets along the hedgerows, and their limp brown withered leaves hanging incongruously between them. There's something fascinating and almost gothic about the discordance of the two. The dead leaves, the vibrant aliveness of the berries. And sloes are also in abundance, and the blend of the two, Bryony and blackthorn, as each wrap around the other, create a gorgeous artist's palette of colour. And the ducks are gathering into groups, the juvenile males beginning to show hints of iridescent green sheen on their heads. For the most part, they get along with each other quite amiably, sharing the sunnier places on the bankside in which to sunbathe and doze. Although I am beginning to see the younger males beginning to assert themselves with some of the older males. Generally, it's little more than a lowered neck in the direction of their competitor. But sometimes it escalates to wings splashing and angry quacks. And flight duels are also in evidence. 3, sometimes more, cutting low over the fields, then swinging around a prominent tree marker and back down the canal. There's a lot of activity in the skies at the moment, particularly at dawn and dusk. Great whirlwinding storm clouds of jackdaws and then rooks call and boil, slowly working their way along the canal down to their roosts. And even our local heron has become more visible recently. At times, even picking his careful, long-legged way, as if he is pantomiming walking on tiptoe between the boats. He stands over the water, silent, statue still, with only a yawn or a quick swallow to show that he is something alive. The other morning, he was standing, hunched in the middle of the sheep field, motionless as 2 ravens flew overhead. His grey plumage looking for all the world like a clerical vestment, bringing to mind Dylan Thomas's memorable description of Lochregeb's heron-priested shores. It's always really lovely to hear from you, and you can contact me in a variety of ways, either putting a comment on one of the social media platforms that I use, which are Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, and Mastodon. Or you could email me at nighttimeonstillwaters, all one word, at gmail.com, or go to the NOSW Pod website, where you can either drop me a voicemail by using the little microphone icon, or use the contact form. It's always really lovely to hear from you. And I had a lovely message from AK this week. And AK, thank you so much for taking the time and trouble to contact me. And I'm really glad that you and your partner enjoy this podcast. It was also really lovely to hear from Tracy Thomas, who's one of our Lockwheelers and a long-time listener. I followed my mention in the last episode about Sue Walker, who had written about all the amazing similarities and connections that she shared with places that I know so well and have played a big role in my life. One of which was a neighbouring village to one where I grew up called Chipperfield. Well, Tracy wrote to tell me how she and her husband, when they first met, used to love taking a picnic up to Chipperfield and watching the cricket being played on the common. It really is a small world. And thank you also to Derek Watts, and also to Jason and to Tracy, and I'm so glad that you enjoyed the soundscapes in the last episode. I also want to say a really big thank you to Vanessa from the Mindful Narrowboat vlog. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for your really kind and lovely words about this podcast. And I'm thrilled and really touched. And thank you so much also for recommending the podcast to your viewers. Again, I'm really, really touched. And also I'd like to send quick hellos out to Sem El Raug and Mind Shambles on Mastodon. And Mind Shambles, I couldn't agree with you more. And hellos also to LJ and Bodie and to Deb Moon Mountford and to Lee Thomas. And Lee, thanks for the questions. Yes, I'll certainly include them in a future episode. And if anyone else has any questions that you'd like to ask me, then please send them in. As I said at the beginning of this section, you can contact me in a number of ways, and I'll be more than delighted to try at least to answer some. And I am still aware, Chris, from the land of green ginger, that I haven't answered your question yet. I am working on it. It's just taking the time, and I've been thinking and working on a proper response, but I just keep getting stuck with it. So I am still working on it. Having said all of that, all that remains for me to say is a big thank you to all of our Lockwheelers for supporting this podcast. And they are Susan Baker, Mind Shambles, Chris Hollingsworth, Kevin B., Fleur and David Mcloughlin, Louis Raphael, Tanya Yorge, Andrea Hansen, Chris Hines, Chris and Alan on the narrowboat The Land of Green Ginger, Captain Arlo, Rebecca Russell, Alison on the narrowboat Mucker, Derek and Pauline on Silver Fox, Anna V, Orange Cookie, Mary Keane, Tony Rutherford, Arabella Holtzapfel, Rory with MJ and Kayla, the narrowboat Precious Jet, Linda Reynolds Birkins, Richard Noble, Carol Ferguson, Tracy Thomas, Mark and Tricia Stowe, and Madeline Smith. Thank you. Growing up, Friday was my favourite day. It was the start of the weekend and the end of the school week. I loved school, but I loved being at home more. And I loved Friday because Friday night was crisp night. The strength and bond of a family is not so much forged by its grand gestures or the once-in-a-lifetime adventure or holiday, but in its little local rituals, those small shared celebrations of life. Perhaps rather mundane seeming, or even to outside eyes inconsequential, but precious nevertheless. And in my teenage years, if I were ever to have been asked to describe the one thing that characterized our family, I think I'd have to say Friday nights. Although, in all probability, I would have called it crisp night, for that essentially was what it was. I'll just pause here to explain if you're listening to this outside the UK. Crisps are crunchy, savoury thin slices of fried or baked potato, although it can now also include other ingredients. The OED, or the Oxford English Dictionary, helpfully offers this definitive definition of them as being crisp. In full, potato crisp. A thin sliver of potato, fried until crisp, and eaten cold. It also notes that the term's first usage appears in the 1929 edition of the newspaper The Star, and was used in reference to a potato crisp factory. Although it's used to describe a snack that has been quickly fried, dates as far back as 1390. But these appear to relate to batter rather than potato and the crisps that we know and love today. They are what I believe in the United States are referred to as potato chips, which, again in the UK, refer to something very different. But for me, and us as a family growing up, crisps were a special treat. We would only ever have crisps once a week, Friday night, or at birthdays and Christmas. Although my memories of Christmas tend to be about little dishes of twiglets, into which I'd daintily plunge my fist at regular intervals, than it was of bowls of crisps. Whatever, crisps were special fare for us, and I loved them. Although it never struck me as odd when my friends would pop open their bags at school and eat them with such apparent disregard or sense of occasion. To me, it wasn't strange at all, for our crisps were different. They were special. My friends had their lives, and I had mine. And the small triumphs of my week and that heady oasis of the weekends that stretched out in front of me were celebrated in our crisp nights. I'd yet to realize that Dad wasn't happy at work, and so perhaps it was for this reason that the Institute of Friday Nights was first formed, to celebrate the end of another working week, with the untrampled vistas of the weekend ahead to look forward to. Maybe, in some unspoken way, that was why I picked up on this feeling that Friday nights were in some way sacrosanct to us, special. The crisps were stored in a battered old red Crawford's biscuit tin, and it was kept high up on a shelf above my head in the pantry. And it was a pantry too, a proper cool, dark, narrow little room that was squashed between the kitchen and the stairs. It had a frosted window high up on the outside wall, and I learned how to climb up to it and squeeze through it so that I could dangle like a monkey on the outside while peering into our neighbour's garden and kitchen. Although I'm sure by now it's been turned into a downstairs toilet. But for Mum, it was the pantry where everything was stored, from coats and duffel bags, wet weather gear, walking sticks, umbrellas, in fact everything that was too long or just wouldn't otherwise fit into the cupboard under the stairs. And to the left of it, high up, there was an alcove on which there was a sort of like Lazy Susan type arrangement, in which you could keep all sorts of jars of pickles, preserves, jams, and anything else that you needed to store out of the way. And it was here where the red Crawford's biscuit tin of crisps was safely kept. I remember that the lid was quite close-fitting. You had to get your nails right under its rim to prise the lid off. And the reverse side of it was unpainted, and would bend and warp your reflection in its blinding depths to the sound of thunder. And there, inside the tin, lay a heap of coloured packets. And I was a connoisseur of crisp packets. Golden Wonder, Chipmunk, Walker's, KP, Smith's, with their little blue packets of salt. And they crackled to the touch and defied all efforts to smell their contents, even when you ran your nose along their crimped top edges. But their colours were so vivid you could almost taste their smell. And for me, their packets were works of art in themselves. One packet, Golden Wonder's Ringos, cheese and onion and pickled onion, were decorated with cartoon cavemen. Others had little Knight with bushy moustache, and he was printed in a different colour to coordinate with the flavour. And each packet deserved to be studied and was carefully read front and back. And sometimes there were offers and tokens to collect, which could be cut or torn out of and stored in all their saltiness in one of my collecting tins. I had another tin, a little red Chinese tea caddy, for Milky Bar wrappers, so that every time I carefully lifted the lid and took in a deep breath, I was transported into a world that smelt of Milky Bar chocolate. And some of those tempting offers on the back of crisp packets were so unmissable and sang a siren song so sweet that playtimes at school were spent raking through the rubbish bins with a couple of my friends and retrieving fistloads of used packets. And with high-pitched anticipation, I would send off the requisite number of vouchers or tokens by post and wait. And the postman's arrival would be breathlessly sought and agonizingly long. Once I received the membership pack for the Golden Wonders Rock and Rollers, a 70s fictional glam rock band, and the pack contained membership certificate, posters, badges, and, wonder of wonders, a floppy plastic record that skipped and jumped on our record player as it played the Rock and Rollers theme song, "Betcha Gonna Like Them." Each Friday night on the radio, Robin Boyle would introduce "Friday Night is Music Night" from the Golders Green Hippodrome, and its sweeping signature tune would soar through the house, announcing our time to begin our crisp night. Each of us would pick out our packet from the tin. Earlier in the week, Sis and I would have given our requests for type and flavour to Mum. Oh, the tongue-teasing choice. My favourites were always something sharp and vinegary. The stronger the flavour, the better. In my head, you got more for your money that way. Potato and corn snacks that would draw all moisture out of the tongue and set the roof of the mouth on fire were to me eye-watering delights. Mum and Dad invariably had plain, or ready salted as it's called. And even today I can't help equating maturity and feeling grown up when eating ready salted, as opposed to the rather guilty, immature pleasure of the flavoured varieties. Having selected them, each of us would open our packet and hand them around for everyone to share. Equality and fairness were premium, and Sis and I would carefully compare the size of our selected crisps, lest one would be short-changed by the other, and Dad would pantomime with wrinkled face to show his appalled horror at the vinegariness of my choice. And alongside this, Sis and I would have a glass of fizzy lemonade, the other Friday night treat, that would tickle and fizz up our noses. And Dad would pour himself a pint of homebrew and make Mum a shandy, and our weekend would begin. In the summer we would sit outside, sometimes on the step outside the French windows, sometimes on the garden steps leading up to the lawn, sometimes on the steps of the greenhouse that smelt of creosote and paraffin and tomato plants. Actually, the first image that comes to my mind when thinking of Mum is her there, sitting on the step of the greenhouse, her long legs in a chaos of angles, deep in a book, or maybe writing or drawing something. Sometimes just sitting, listening to the life of the local neighbourhood rise and flow around her, drinking in the world. And Sis and I would sit or sprawl on the lawn, and sometimes if the air turned chillier, a blanket would be spread out for us, and it would be requisitioned by the dogs, but Sis and I didn't care. It was Friday night. It was crisp night. Mum and Dad, squashed together, perched on the little brick step of the greenhouse. Most times, though, it was on the steps leading up to the lawn, upon which we all sat at various heights. Right beside them grew a large, straggly lavender bush, polka-dotted with bees and the languid syrup-thick warmth of summer. It would capture errant balls rolling free from the slope of the lawn. Sometimes, unaccountably, one of my toy cars would be found among its knotted branches. There was always a deflated football, imprinted with dog's teeth, lying sullenly in its tangled depths. And so we would gather together, this small family that defined the heart of my world, celebrating the weekend with our packet of crisps and the synthetic tang of our fizzy drink. And the sun would slip down the pebble-dashed wall of our house, and the darkening sky became threaded with bats, and the world would slow down. And the radio would quietly be playing from inside the house, and the dusk would colour the shadows as smoky velvet under the huge fir tree that covered our garden. The main road would begin to fall quiet, and distant goods trains would clank their lazy lullabies across the valley. The loose-limbed tangle of branches of the trees which bordered our garden, even the gnarled, feathery arms of the lilac, which I so loved, even though it stained my trousers green, and in whose lofty embrace I transcended the borders of my world, would all slowly melt into the dark, starry night. And the scents and aroma of night would swirl like colours in water in the gathering twilight. Honeysuckle, lavender, sweet pea, waterfalls of lilac, warm, sun-drenched bark. And even when it was too dark to read, and the ground had become too damp to sprawl upon, Mum and Dad's voices would float and drift on the night air, in a slow waltz with the sleepy pigeon and collared dove purr, and maybe, if we were lucky, the thrill of an owl up Havelock roadway. And the kitchen light spilling warm moth-dancing squares over the rough paving that was strewn with toys of dogs and children. On some occasions, I could never still determine how the choice was made, but Mum and Dad would say, "Let's go for a drink at the pub." The weather was always perfect, the soft golden haze of summer's evenings stretching long with velvet shadows for which I still long. And this isn't anything to do with looking back on the past with rose-tinted spectacles. The weather had to be good, because these were the days when children were not allowed inside pubs, even if accompanied by adults. And so we were consigned to using the pub garden. Not that appeared much of a hardship. I would sometimes peer around the edge of a pub entrance door, if it happened to be left open, to gaze inside at the dim, fug-laden world of grown-ups inside. I've no idea what made me feel this way, but for me they held a strangely forbidding, unwelcoming air about them. I have to say I much preferred the outside, and it would take me a long time before, as an adult, I ventured to set foot inside a pub, and they still feel rather alien territory to me, even now. And so instead of gathering together in the back garden, we'd all clamber into the minivan and off we'd go through the Hertfordshire lanes to Mum and Dad's favourite locals. It's only now that I wonder why we never went to any of the pubs in King's Langley. They were all within walking distance, and some of which were really nice. In fact, from time to time, when Dad's friends popped round, they'd go off to the Eagle, or the Rose and Crown, or the Young Pretender. I suppose they felt that the drive was all part of the excitement for us, and it was. The Two Brewers in Chipperfield was a favourite, just opposite the common with its war memorial and its oaks as ancient as time. And sometimes before our drink we'd go for a walk in the fringe of its woods. Always a place redolent with promise and mystery for me. One of my teachers had read B.B.'s Brendan Chase to us at school, the story of some boys who had run away and lived as outlaws in a great forest. And Chipperfield woods would forever be indelibly associated with the forest of Brendan Chase. And there was one in Sarrett, I think, but I can't remember too much about it, only the drive there. But the other favourite was the Three Horseshoes at Winkwell, and it was, and still is, on the Grand Union Canal beside the rickety old swing bridge that banged and clanked as cars drove over it. It's just a short way from the lock there, too. Once when we were there, a boy fell in and drowned. Well, I think he drowned, I'm not sure. He could have just fallen in, but then again it might have been somewhere else along the canal. Making sense of things when you're a small boy with a bottle of pop and a bag of crisps is difficult. And the only thing I do remember was some sombre talking in low voices that sounded serious, and phrases like, locks are very dangerous, and you should never play near locks. And a fire engine came over the bridge. The past tends to become a faded blur of impressions, feelings stronger, more pointed than images. And from memory, I don't recall being affected at all by the incident, only by a faint astonishment that something so earth-shattering could have occurred right under my nose, and I had been completely unaware of it. But the impact of that tragedy, real or otherwise, has remained with me. Very rarely, on crossing a lock on the balance beams, do I not get a flashback to Winkwell and ginger beer, the shouts of serious men, low voices, the clatter of a fire engine going over the swing bridge, and the awful truth that locks are dangerous places. Crisps, of course, still played their part in these special Friday nights, but it was the whole magical drama of the thing that took centre stage. Sitting perched on rustic wooden benches in the pub garden, drinking ginger beer from the bottle so that it clanked jarringly against your teeth and the bubbles went up your nose. That was what was special. And when I got a bit older, I went a bit more sophisticated and went for tomato juice. They would put a dash, or sometimes if I was lucky, more than just a dash, of Worcester sauce in it. And I would try to drink around the dark little splodge of Worcester sauce in the middle of the glass right until the end. For some inexplicable reason, I got it into my head that this was a Bloody Mary. And so we would sit in the tranquil paradise of a country pub garden, with me sipping at my Bloody Mary with all the style and sophistication that a rather unkempt 13-year-old can muster. I was only savagely disabused of my notion of the Bloody Mary much later. I can't remember all the details. Maybe it's because the trauma of it's all mercilessly dulled my memory of the event. However, I was at a party with some friends, and the host was engaged with plying everyone with drinks. Now, I'm not, nor ever was, a huge party goer, and so I was a little on edge to get things right and to give an air of, sophistication. And I had noticed a bottle labelled Bloody Mary among the profusion of gaudily coloured cocktail bottles gathered on the sideboard. And rather than resorting to my normal, just a glass of lemonade, please, I thought, gosh, I rather fancy the idea of airily wafting around the room, delicately sipping at a Bloody Mary. Now, hindsight being what it is, I should have probably taken note of the surprised look given by the host when I conversationally added, "Do you know, I don't think I've had a Bloody Mary since I was a little kid." Alas, I didn't. Had I done so, it might have saved me from the indescribably foul and undrinkable concoction that simultaneously scalded my throat and blew my head apart, and also the poisonous jet of this noxious liquid that erupted out of my nose and mouth across the fine linen and the cruet set. Another memorable Friday night was when we were on holiday in Norfolk. It had been a long, tiring and hot day by the sea in Sheringham. For me, one of the most quintessentially English coastal towns. And we were all ravenous. And so, for a special treat, rather than going back to the campsite and Mum rustling up something for us on the primer stove with the pressure cooker that hissed and whistled, shaking ominously on the tripod legs, we went for fish and chips. In those days, although not wrapped in newspaper, they were still wrapped in paper. And I can't be the only one who didn't love sucking great wads of salt and vinegar-flavoured newsprint, surely. And clutching our mouth-watering bundles, we all trooped down to the seafront and found a space to sit on the wall by the lifeboat house. And just as we began to unwrap our feasts, a familiar paternal voice broke through the seaside hubbub, coming from a radio that was being played in the lifeboat house. "This is Robin Boyle at the Golders Green Hippodrome, welcoming you to Friday Night is Music Night." So many winter's nights when we'd settle down, and as the timbre of Robin Boyle's wonderfully rich voice welcomed us to join him and the BBC Concert Orchestra, one of us would recall us sitting on that sea wall in Sheringham. And how odd it was back then, when it seemed like the middle of the afternoon. But now, with the street lamps shining outside, and the valley opposite alight with pinpricks of house lights, and the red lamps of the radio mast in the distance, this seems like late in the night. And when the sound of sleety rain rattled against the windows, we'd remember the sunshine, and the feel of sand between our toes, and the salty smell of seaweed, and the shrieking sky-blue calls of the herring gulls. And those winter Friday nights were every bit as special as the summer ones. In winter, Dad would be sitting in his armchair in the corner, with its stretched green plums cover with floral print of roses, and which even that had worn through at the arms, and so Dad had rustled up on Mum's treadle sewing machine some heavy-duty patches that were made of some thick carpet-like material to cover them. And Mum would be sitting on the floor by the fire by his feet. She hated sitting in chairs, her hand in his. And both would be lost in the world of their books. And I would invariably have a small pile of comics and looking at pictures in books. I think I've said it before, I was a terrible reader in those days. And Wendy had her own books, quite often with horses on the cover. But then later she began to read books she could actually talk to Mum and Dad about. Neville Shute, Douglas Bader, T.E. Lawrence, J. Blythe and John Ridgway. Books with few pictures but interesting covers. And the dogs would sprawl, snoring, scorching in front of the fire, until one of us would smell the scent of scorched fur and shout, "Dog, you're burning!" or "Pooch, you're on fire!" And either Tilly or Sally would hrumph and flop themselves an inch or two further away. And after Friday night his music night had finished, with its crescendo of soprano and applause, we would select records to play. Their smooth, glossy sleeves and the smell of vinyl were, to me, the height of luxury and opulence. Even the little black velvet-covered tube for collecting record fluff smelt of pound notes. And the little serif swirls of music for pleasure motifs on the record labels, and the inner sleeves filled with tiny black and white pictures of other records for sale, were entrances to a world of untold glamour. Our record collection wasn't particularly large, but our tastes were fairly similar. We seemed to be quite happy to journey through our books and comics to the tunes of the big war movies themes, played so often that Dad had to buy a replacement, or Mantovani, Delius, Jeff Love, or Hot Hits for Children. Although my collection of Thunderbird records and Ken Dodd's Diddyman were perhaps too strong a meat for Friday nights. And memories dim and morph. Looking at that old picture of Dad in the battered, well-loved green armchair of his, it looks so small now. I can remember how I used to burrow into its cavernous depths, smelling of tobacco and beer and dust and family. Perhaps that front room with the bay window that looked over the valley with the canal running along the bottom of it would be small too. Memories shift and distort, but the feelings don't. Friday night, crisp night. Our little Friday night ritual defined us as a family, not because it was in itself important, but because it celebrated those overlooked things and helped to express those often inexpressible things that form the heart of a family. There were 6 of us in those days. Well, 7 if you count the cat, Christmas Puss, but she rarely joined us for our Friday nights. Now, only 2 of us are left. First the 2 dogs left, then Mum, then, more recently, Dad. But it also still remains the hearth, the heart, where we still come to recognize and acknowledge those tiny mountains of our weekly lives. And perhaps more importantly, what remains is that understanding that we don't find ourselves or each other in the grand actions and the grand gestures, but within the small, seemingly commonplace things that naturally emerge and evolve in our lives. And it is in those things that we find our roots and sense of shared values. And this is the narrowboat Erica, signing off for the night and wishing you a very restful and peaceful night. Good night. Temperature outside 11.2 degrees, inside 18 degrees, humidity 89%, dew point 9 degrees, wind direction southwest, wind speed 16 miles per hour, barometric pressure 1003.1 rising, cloud cover 75%, cloud ceiling 36,000 feet, precipitation 1.02 millimeters, moon phase 0.8%, waning crescent, day length 12 hours 20 minutes, sunset 19:10, sky casting 6:52.